William J. Baxley was born June 27, 1941 in Dothan, Alabama. He graduated from Dothan High School. He received a B.S. degree from the College of Commerce and Business Administration from the University of Alabama in 1962. He received his LLB degree in 1964 also from the University of Alabama Law School. He served as district attorney for the 20th Judicial Circuit, is that Dothan, Houston County, 2 terms as Attorney General for the state of Alabama, and 1 term as Lieutenant Governor for the state of Alabama. At the time of his election as Attorney General at the age of 28, he was the youngest Attorney General in the United States. He held that record until whippersnapper upstart from the state of Arkansas named Bill Clinton beat him out. Mr. Baxley is currently engaged in the private practice of law up in Birmingham, Alabama, as the senior partner in the law firm of Baxley, Dillard, McKnight, and James. His law practice is varied with a concentration on litigation. He represents both plaintiffs and defendants and engages in trial work throughout the state of Alabama. He was honored for his accomplishments as an attorney by induction as a fellow in the International Academy of Trial Lawyers in 2001. He was recognized during his 2 terms as Attorney General as a pioneer in the recruiting of women and African Americans into the rank of Alabama's state legal system. In fact, he hired now federal judge, then attorney Myron Thompson to be one of his assistants, and I believe it was the first African American hire in the office. His prosecution of persons responsible for the commissions of hate crimes, environmental pollution offenses, and corruptions in public office earned him critical acclaim throughout the state and numerous awards. He was prominently featured in the 1997 Spike Lee documentary 4 Little Girls for his successful prosecution of Mr. Chambliss, we saw up on the screen there, and the bombing of Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church. His prosecutorial accomplishments in other Alabama cases have been praised and documented in the books and periodicals Dogs Until Justice Rolls Down in the Reader's Digest, People magazine, and numerous other publications. In 1982, Bill Baxley was elected Lieutenant Governor and served until January of 1987. As presiding officer of the Senate, he was instrumental in passing balanced budgets on time, which is quite a feat. In fact, for almost 4 decades, only during Baxley's tenure as the Senate president, did both budgets pass on time and every year. He's well known for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing case that he prosecuted, but perhaps the pardon the year before in 1976 is a significant chapter in our state's history that has really gone really unspoken. It's been mentioned several times, and recently an Alabama Heritage article mentioned it. But with renewed interest now, the Alabama legislature is currently considering a bill to provide for the pardon. It doesn't pardon them, but it provides the legal mechanism for the boys, all 9 of the Scottsboro boys, to be posthumously pardoned. It has a good chance of passing, and there's also a declaration of exoneration. Is that what it is you said, John? Joint resolution to exonerate the Scottsboro boys too. So it's a timely legal issue, and I had no idea until I read this article in the Alabama Heritage about Mr. Baxley's role in this and about how this happened, and how at the time Clarence Norris was a fugitive from justice, and what really happened. That's what we're going to hear tonight, and maybe we'll hear some facts that may have never been told, so I'm looking forward. Please join me in welcoming General Bill Baxley.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for the invitation to come down to Mobile. I always love to come to Mobile. I have never seen either of those clips, so I wish you'd give me a copy of them. I'm showing them to my children next time there. But and also I appreciate that overly generous introduction, but you're welcome to make it any time. Thank you so much. I didn't realize until early this morning, and I have enjoyed getting ready for this, because a lot of the stuff about this pardon I had forgotten. And so digging back through it and reconstructing it has been something that I've very much enjoyed. But I did not realize until this morning what a propitious date you picked for the meeting, because it was exactly 82 years ago today, on March 25th of 1931, that the so-called incident occurred. So you really picked a propitious day for this particular program. Now, what I thought I would do, in order for you to get CLE credits, you got to have a handout, and I prepared handouts, but I'll give you a general introduction before I pass out the handouts, or ask Matt to pass them out, if that's okay. On March the 25th of 1931, a freight, of course it was the Great Depression, and a group of hobos hopped on freight trains all over the country. And on the train that was going from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Huntsville, Alabama, it had a bunch of cars, but they had at least 9 young blacks from 13 to 20, and quite a few young whites that were hoboing, and 2 white females. And the white females had hoboed up the day before from Huntsville to Chattanooga, and then they were hoboing back to Huntsville on the 25th. And sometime during the ride through out of Chattanooga, some of the blacks and some of the white boys got into some kind of altercation. And so word got out that there was an altercation. And when the train got to Paint Rock, Alabama, which is in Jackson County, the train was stopped, and they had a posse, so to speak, met the train. And so the 2 females got off fully dressed with overalls, and at first they didn't say anything. In fact, they tried to get away from the authorities. And so when the authorities got the females, and the authorities at that time only thought that there had been some kind of altercation. So the 2 women said that they had all been raped, both been raped by all of the black young blacks. And so that's the first time anybody had heard that. But that immediately, they took them into custody, and word spread, and they took them to jail in Scottsboro, the county seat, and charged all 9 of them with rape. And it got so volatile, the governor, before dark, had to call out the National Guard. And the National Guard had to come in and move them to jail in Gadsden. And 6 days later, on the 30th of March, I reckon 5 days later, the grand jury was called in special session and indicted all 9 of them, including the ones that were 13 years old, for rape. And in less than a month, less than 2 weeks actually, April the 6th, they went to trial in Jackson County for an all-white jury, all-white grand jury, all-white jury. They were all convicted except one. One was a mistrial for one of them named Roy Wright. And the others were all found guilty and sentenced to death. They appealed to the Alabama Supreme Court. The Alabama Supreme Court upheld it in less than a year. March the 24th, I believe, of which was like one day being a full year of 1932, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentences. The lawyers appealed then to the U.S. Supreme Court, which granted cert, and on November the 7th, the Supreme Court reversed it on lack of adequate counsel. They said they had inadequate counsel. So it was sent back. When it came back, they by then had gotten some real great lawyers. Judge Leibovitz, Samuel Leibovitz was one of them. And he came in, and they filed a motion for change of venue, and it was granted, and they moved the trial to Morgan County, Decatur, Alabama, which is a fairly close proximity to Jackson County. But the judge over there was Judge Horton, Horton. And I'm going to jump ahead of myself for just a minute. I knew a little bit about Judge Horton Well, for one thing, in college, I had read one of the books by this Haywood Patterson. I think the name of it was Scottsboro Boy. And I just had a vague impression that they were innocent from reading that book, but you know, you certainly can't base anything on what you read, well, what you've read 20, 30 years ago, and also could very well be self-serving. But I did know of Judge Horton, and I knew his son. He had a son who had served a term or two in the Alabama Senate, named Ed Horton, was one of the most honorable, honest, fearless people I'd ever known. And I didn't know Judge Horton. I never had the privilege of knowing him. But the second trial being moved over there was in a Judge Horton circuit, and so Judge Horton presided. Now, at the second trial, they not only had more adequate counsel, but one of the two women, Ruby Bates, recanted her testimony, said that nobody had been raped, there was nothing that occurred between the black men or boys, the kids, and the white females, and that there was some kind of altercation between some of the people on the train, that nothing involving weapons or anything, just throwing rocks at each other. And she said that everything they said was a lie. Now, she testified to that at the trial. Now, the other one said that she was lying, that they were raped by all the blacks, and so in spite of all the testimony at the trial, an all-white jury once again found them all guilty and sentenced them to death. The Supreme Court of Alabama once again affirmed, and the Supreme Court of the United States once again reversed, this time on the ground that of racial discrimination in the makeup of both the grand jury and the trial jury, because both of them being all white. So it was sent back, this will be the second time, for retrial. So this time it goes back to Scottsboro, and they don't have Judge Horton. Wait a minute, I'm wrong there. No, excuse me, I'm jumping ahead of myself, pardon me. Judge Horton, when they were convicted in Decatur, and when they filed a motion for new trial, and Judge Horton wrote an opinion granting the motion for a new trial and said that they were innocent, and he cited the evidence. And that opinion, I'll jump ahead of myself deliberately now, that opinion formed, was really the basis for why I did what I did later, 30 years later. And that opinion is one of the handouts. It's the last thing in the handout, and I recommend to you tonight, sometime or tomorrow, read that opinion. It's a brilliantly written opinion by a very courageous and able judge that I'm proud was a citizen of our state. But as they say, no good deed goes unpunished, and so Judge Horton the next year was defeated because of his opinion in that case, doing the right thing. So he gave him a new trial. This time it went back to Scottsboro. They didn't have Judge Horton. They were again convicted. This time they appealed to the Supreme Court, and Alabama Supreme Court affirmed again. This time was where I got myself confused. It goes back up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sends it back for a second time. So it's been sent back now twice by the Supreme Court, thrown out once by the trial judge. And this time it was they sent it back on the grounds of racial discrimination in the makeup of the jury panels. So they come back for yet another round, and they get convicted yet again, sentenced to death. And again, Ruby Bates says it's all a lie, that nothing happened, and but Victoria Price, the other female, stuck to her story. I think if you read Judge Horton's opinion, you can see how she was discredited thoroughly by the facts, and also he said in his opinion that by her own demeanor on the stand, he did not give any credibility to her testimony. But I think this is the point now where we'll, if you would, Matt, would pass out the, they're right underneath you there. and I'll keep going while he's passing that out. I'll help you walk through this if you. So they go off to prison, and of course they're on death row. And in 1938, Bibb Graves, who was the governor of Alabama, one of our great governors, commuted the sentences to life for all of them. And so that at least removed the possibility of the electric chair from them. But if you look at page 2 of the handout, is Governor Graves' commutation, is document where he commuted the sentence for Clarence Norris. Now go back to the first page, and this will be where I start my part of my involvement in it. Excuse me when I'll start talking about my part of involvement in it, but that's the topic that Matt assigned me. I still don't feel comfortable talking about that, but I reckon that is more of a historical lesson than anything else. But in Alabama, the law that I think is still on the books, it says that if anybody has been sentenced to death and had their sentence commuted, they can only get a pardon if you have sufficient evidence presented to the parole board that they were actually innocent of the crime. Now, I think in anything other than a death sentence, a pardon is looked at as forgiveness for something that you've done. But if you ever have been sentenced to death and have had your sentence commuted, you can't do that. You've got to show that you were innocent, and you can't be forgiven. So that's what the law was in Alabama at the time, and I think still is that section with the little arrow on it there. But so in 1944, Clarence Norris, who's the subject of our little lesson tonight, he got paroled, and so that meant he had served roughly 15 years in prison for a crime that he didn't do. But at least he was no longer under the death sentence, and at least he was paroled. But within 2 weeks, they revoked his parole and sent him back. And so they paroled him again, I think in a couple of years later, and that's when he became a fugitive. He thought they were going to just continue to revoke him, and so he went up north and went underground, like I say, assumed his brother's name, and got a job with the sanitation department of the city of New York, and spent 30 years without getting in any kind of serious trouble, and had a fairly good job record, and remained a fugitive. So one day I get a call. Well, I get one of my assistants, Milton Davis, who's was one of my assistant attorneys general and was black, and he was working with me in '76, and he came in to see me at the office and told me that he had one of his friends who I knew as well, named Donald Watkins. Some of you may know Donald Watkins. And Watkins, at that time, was a young associate of Fred Gray's. And the NAACP out of New York had hired Fred Gray to see about getting a pardon for Clarence Norris. Clarence Norris, by then, was in his 60s. And he wanted to clear his name. He maintained he didn't want to die a fugitive. And he wanted his children to know that he hadn't committed any crime. So he went to the NAACP and asked for their help in seeing if he could quit living as a fugitive under an assumed name and get a pardon. So they hired Fred Gray. Fred assigned it to Donald Watkins. Donald contacted Milton Davis. Milton contacted me. And so as you can see, the third letter is a letter from Watkins to Milton, where he's thanking him for getting an appointment to see me in the last paragraph, and telling him a little bit about what they want. And at that time, they don't identify where Clarence Norris is, what state he's in. He's still a fugitive, so we're not brought in on the real facts of where he is at that point in time. So they come to see me and present their argument, and the NAACP later comes down as well, and they were represented by a young guy about my age named Jim Myerson, who was a white guy, wonderful lawyer. We became good friends. And also the head of the department was a guy named Nat Jones. And Nat was a black guy that later got appointed to the whatever circuit that is in Ohio. What's that, Fourth Circuit? He was appointed to the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. And I became very good friends with Nat Jones. I'm going to digress a minute now and tell a little story about that has nothing to do with the topic tonight. After Nat Jones got appointed to the circuit court, I got hired a few years ago on a case out of Tennessee where a guy had been convicted of a drug offense in federal court in Nashville. And Tennessee is in the same circuit as Ohio. And so after he got convicted, he hired us we weren't in on the trial, but he hired us to appeal it. His brother was from Birmingham. And so David McKnight and I, one of my law partners, went to Cincinnati to argue the case. And so when we get in there to argue the case, Nat Jones is on the panel. And so when I told David, I said, David, I know him. He's my friend. So David is going to handle the first part of the argument. We're the appellate. He's going first. Then the government's going to go, and then I'm going to close. And so when David stands up and introduces himself, Nat Jones says, excuse me, Mr. McKnight, let me interrupt you just a minute. Said, I noticed you with a firm named Baxley. Is that any relation to a fellow named Bill Baxley, used to be the Attorney General? Said, he's a good friend of mine. And David said, yes, sir, that is Bill Baxley, and there he sits right there. He's getting ready to argue this case before you. And Nat Jones says, oh, well, gosh, Bill, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. Your hair's gotten thinner. And so my client was out on bond, and he and his family were there. And so after the arguments were over, my client was sky high. He was in hog heaven. He said, oh, I hired the right lawyer. I'm sorry, I knew I got the right lawyer. So he was just so happy. And then about 2 months later, the opinion came down, and Nat Jones wrote the opinion and socked it to him and sent him off to prison. So that shows you that judges, and I must say, I think he was right on the law, what he did. But after meeting with the lawyers, with Watkins and Fred and the NAACP lawyers, I agreed that we'd look into it. And I said, if I'm convinced that they're innocent, we'll do everything we can. And we did a very thorough job of looking into it. And I became absolutely 1,000% convinced that this was a horrible injustice, just like we had heard all these years, that these kids were totally innocent, and that it was a shame that this had transpired in our state. So, but we didn't do it perfunctorily, and we spent from March until August really making sure we had covered everything. And so when I got convinced that we had, I told them, and Milton coordinated it with, and I wrote a letter that's in there in your handout, dated August the 5th to Pardon and Parole Board, setting out why I felt like they should issue a pardon to Clarence Norris. A week after that, August the 11th, Donald Watkins, on behalf of Clarence Norris, writes the Pardon and Parole Board. And his letter is included in the handout. Now, on August 31st, I got back a letter from the chairman of the Pardon and Parole Board, Norman Ursary, who was from Dothan, in my hometown. And we weren't on the same page. If you can read his letter to me, after you read my letter saying he should get a pardon, he wrote me back and doesn't address anything except saying that Clarence Norris is a fugitive. So on September 10th, I wrote him back, and we're still in 76, and this time I had Milton. If you notice on there, you can see where they put up their Milton reply. So I had Milton Davis, who was carrying the bulk of the work for me, wrote Mr. Ursary back and told him that he didn't answer our question. And so a week later, Mr. Ursary wrote us back and said that as long as Clarence Norris was a fugitive, he couldn't get a pardon. And if he would turn himself in, submit himself to the jurisdiction of the prison system and the courts of Alabama, then he could apply for a pardon. Well, as you can imagine, the last thing that Clarence Norris wants to do is submit himself to the goodwill of the corrections department or the court system of Alabama at that time. So even though he had agreed to let them know he was in New York, he hadn't told them what name he was going by. And he was just going to keep on being a fugitive rather than do that. So then Myerson writes him a letter and tries to tell them how they're they're just not being realistic and not being logical to require these requirements of him with the facts in this case. So at some point in time, and I can't find out exactly when that was, but I went over and met with Governor Wallace. And my political philosophy and Governor Wallace's were kind of 180 degrees apart. But having said that, I was very, very fond of Governor Wallace. I liked him as a person, as a human being. I think he liked me. Well, I know he did. And we had a very good working relationship the whole 8 years I was Attorney General and the whole 4 years I was Lieutenant Governor. And I never supported him for president or anything like that. I never told him that I agreed with him when I didn't. I told him when I did disagree with him, but we had a wonderful working relationship. And when I told Governor Wallace what I had found and what I believed about the innocence of Clarence Norris, Governor Wallace, who I think is, along with Milton, is one of the two heroes in this case, Milton Davis, Governor Wallace said, I'll do everything I can. Now, I think I wrote an opinion, but I couldn't find it in time to bring it down here. But I think we had to write an opinion. Two of the parole board members, one of them was my good friend, Cyril Sellers, and the other one is William Robinson. And they became convinced that Norris was innocent and wanted to give him a parole. But if you go back to the statute, it's got to be unanimous, and the governor's got to sign on. And, of course, Ursary was still against it. So that's where Governor Wallace comes in. Governor Wallace had appointed Ursary to the parole board and had reappointed him. And so Governor Wallace calls in Ursary. And I wasn't in that meeting, but Ursary had a change of heart. And he said that he had now learned things that he didn't know about Clarence Norris. And he'd learned that he'd had an exemplary life in New York for 30 years. And so he was going to change. I've jumped ahead of myself again, though. The other two members before Governor Wallace was able to do that with Norman Ursary, Robinson and Sellers voted to void the delinquency of Clarence Norris and put him on unsupervised parole. So that letter is in there. That didn't require unanimous consent of the parole board. So at least that got him out of any danger of being rearrested if they found out who he was. And so those two members stepped out and did something to where he at least could breathe a little easier. And then I think that they made me give them an opinion that legally they could do that, and that's the opinion I couldn't find. It may be that it was an oral opinion, but I thought that I gave them a written opinion on that, but I hadn't found that. But anyway, I thought that they stepped up to the plate big time and did that, and I had to write another letter that set out the reasons why he was innocent. And so on October the 25th is the letter where we did that, which again Milton prepared for our office with my approving it. And then Sarah Sellers, almost immediately thereafter, I think maybe the same day as that, puts out her opinion where she says that she agrees that he's innocent and ought to be pardoned. And then the next one is the press release that came out over Norman Ursery's signature after his talk with Governor Wallace. And so that will, he tells you how he's changed his mind. The next document in the handouts is the actual pardon itself of Clarence Norris. And of course he came down, you saw that clip where he met with the parole board and met with the governor. And I had a luncheon for him and all the lawyers and the people involved. Roy Wilkins, the executive director of the NAACP, came with him. And so we had a nice luncheon for him over at the Sahara restaurant. And so Milton got Clarence Norris to autograph his copy of the pardon. So this is a copy of Milton's copy of the pardon with Clarence Norris's autograph on the top. And then the next one is the official sheet with all three members of the board and signed by Wallace. Wallace told me one time that was one of the proudest signatures that he'd ever attached to a document. I thought that Clarence Norris was a very reserved, shy, honorable, decent human being when I met him that day. He's not outgoing. He's, like I say, very reserved and shy. But by then I was already convinced of his innocence beyond any kind of doubt. But if I hadn't been, I think just being around him, I would have been further convinced that he was innocent. The next one is the most important document there. It's a long one. That is a copy that Matt found for me of Judge Horton's opinion. And that was exhibit number one of what made me sign on and jump in it and do what I agreed to do. Judge Horton was a very brave and courageous man, and the epitome of what we should hope that our judiciary is. Well, this was, I enjoyed, like I say, going back and reconstructing this. It's the first time I've ever given this program. I hadn't even given it much thought since it happened until Matt called and asked me about it. I think it is, like I say, certainly appropriate on this day that we have this subject for this program. And I'll be glad to try to answer any questions any of you may have.
I've got one.
Yeah.
What happened to the other six, and also with any reparations or any kind of compensation for?
They were all dead by this time, and the answer is no, there were never any reparations. Now, Matt told me, which I have not read, that he read where Clarence Norris said that, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm talking this secondhand, this is hearsay from Matt. But Matt said he read where Clarence Norris had written that the reason he never sued the state or tried to get any reparations was that he was afraid it would embarrass me.
That's true.
And I was running for governor.
He said
I later was running for governor, and he was afraid it might embarrass me. So I thought that, I never knew that when he was alive, or it was only this past week that Matt told me that, but it's hard for me to believe that this thing happened, but it did, and yes.
Did you ever have any conversations with the young ladies?
No.
No.
They had a very good special on TV back in at some point on this case. It was mostly about Judge Horton.
I think it was in 76.
When was it?
It's either 76 or 78.
I think probably 78. I think it wasn't before this. I think it was 78.
And they sued. Both girls sued NBC for libel.
I never talked to them, but it bears reading on the one that didn't, that never recanted. It bears reading carefully what the trial judge, Judge Horton, said about her demeanor and her credibility.
Did you receive any criticism for your decision to pursue the case at the time? Was it a popular?
I got a couple of 3 letters, only one of which was from a judge that I thought was a decent fellow, still think he was, from Anniston, that he felt like it was the wrong thing to do. But I'd say I probably got a total of about 3 letters, which is nothing. I probably got 300 on the bombing case.
Now, I have a question. Governor Wallace, at one time, he was a circuit court judge at one time.
Yes.
Do you think that he actually used or engaged in the diligence you did in looking at the actual case and passing on his decision to support the party, or do you think it was more of a political expediency issue for him, or do you think it was a combination of both?
Neither. I think he took my word for it.
He
I
tried-
think that when I told him what I had found, I think that was good enough for him.
Can you see that happening politically today?
No, I don't think today people have the relationships that Governor Wallace and I had. And again, it goes. I mean, we disagreed philosophically on a lot of issues, but he like I've told a lot of people, I certainly don't agree with the things that he did at the beginning of his career, but he tried to apologize every way a human can do before he died, and I don't know anybody that can try to say they were wrong any more than Governor Wallace has. To a certain extent, Governor Patterson's done the same. But I never minced back on my words of how I felt with Governor Wallace. He knew my roots in Alabama go back about as far as anybody's. The last one of my ancestors that wasn't born in Alabama was born in the 1700s, and he was born in South Carolina. So Governor Wallace and I had a lot of talks. Governor Wallace, you got to understand the election that elected me Attorney General was the same election that Wallace beat Albert Brewer in one of the most racist campaigns of all time. So Wallace came in and I came in on the same day with diametrically opposed public statements. And shortly after he mentioned me hiring Judge Myron Thompson, I hired Judge Thompson. I spent about a year searching for an African American that would agree to come and go to work for the state. And at the time Judge Thompson agreed to come, the only blacks that worked for the state of Alabama other than in the school system were custodians. They wasn't a secretary or anybody. Judge Thompson was the first. And so I'll also tell you, I've told Matt, he asked me how I found Judge Thompson. I said, well, it's a good old boy network. I'm from Dothan. Judge Thompson's grandparents are from Dothan. His daddy was, granddaddy was very respected, and his mother had gone off and moved away from Dothan to Tuskegee. But his grandfather and my father were friends. And so Thanksgiving of my first year home, my dad knew that I had been looking to try to find an assistant, African-American assistant attorney general. And so he asked me, was I still looking? I said, yes, I hadn't had any luck. And he said, well, my friend's grandson is getting ready to finish law school at Yale, and I don't know what the boy wants, but I know the granddaddy would love for him to come back to Alabama. And so that's how I got Judge Thompson to come back, and that's how he became the Jackie Robinson of the Alabama Attorney General's office and the legal community. So when somebody asked, like Matt did earlier, how I found him, I said, the good old boy network, you know.
Do you think this would have gone? Do you think the pardon could have happened without Wallace? I mean,
No, absolutely not.
you said that's a pretty incredible statement. You mean you
Yeah.
said George Wallace was one of the two heroes in this case, and that's a pretty powerful.
Well, Norman Ursery was not going to give in, and Clarence Norris was not going to turn himself over to the mercy of the courts for good reason. And so I think that maybe, after the other two put him on parole where he wasn't subject to arrest, maybe if Ursery went off the board, somebody else came on, maybe years later, he might have gotten a pardon. But I doubt if he'd have been alive to have enjoyed it. It would have had to have been, it would not have happened without George Wallace making Norman Ursery change his mind. And Norman Ursery's son was a very dear friend of mine. He was a detective in Montgomery, but I couldn't do anything with him. But Wallace could. Wallace could and did, yes.
Do you know how old Mr. Norris was when he actually died?
How
long he got to enjoy his absolute?
I think about 5 or 6 years, I think.
He died in 89. 1989 is when he died.
When?
1989 is when he died.
89? Well, gosh, he had a lot of time. Okay, I knew he had several years, but if he died in 89, I think he was 64 when we got his pardon. So that would have been 77. So.
He said only 100 people were at his funeral. A
Oh.
lot more people would be there.
Oh.
I have 100.
But yeah.
We'll all come out and celebrate.
No. Anything else? Well, again, thank you for inviting me. Thank you all. Okay.
Don't forget to fill out your forms on evaluation to get and sign your name and your ASB number. And that's great, y'all. What we'll do is we'll try to get this video up soon to get it out. A lot of, I think, historic things can't release tonight, so that's very interesting. I never knew that about Governor Wallace. So thank y'all for everybody coming. We'll get an email out. We'll work on our next speaker for next month. Thank y'all. Oh, and Judge Whitten was the one that helped us with the food tonight for us, graciously helped us